Under the luminous rings of Orel, the Galactic Council chamber shimmered like a cathedral built of light. The air hummed with overlapping languages, some spoken, others transmitted through scent, pulse, or vibration. At the heart of the circular hall stood the dais of deliberation, where 50 species gathered to determine who among them would mediate the rebellion threatening the Relo sector. It was supposed to be routine, yet today a human stood among them, and that was enough to turn routine into spectacle. Sergeant Mira Halley felt the weight of 100 eyes that were not eyes at all. Faceted lenses, electric tendrils, liquid orbs, all focused on the single figure wrapped in standard Earth Command uniform. Her boots clicked softly on the transparent floor, betraying none of the apprehension pulsing beneath her calm expression. She had been told this was diplomacy. Judging by the tone of the council murmurs, it was something closer to trial by humiliation. From the tiered seats, the Xylan delegate, a creature whose body resembled interlocking ribbons of molten glass, tilted its narrow head and projected a cool tone. The human contingent insists on representation, it said, voice like chimes in a storm. Yet, as record shows, their species remains physically maladroit and emotionally unstable. Do we intend to send a stumbling primate into a precision conflict? The remark rippled through the chamber like wind across a pond. A few species laughed, sharp bursts of static, low clicks, and chirrups of amusement. Mira kept her posture neutral. She'd been warned about the Xylan. They thrived on provocation. Ambassador Giroux, the senior human representative, shifted beside her. He was all diplomatic polish and carefully measured smiles, but she saw the tension in his jaw. Human adaptability is not a flaw, he said evenly. It is what allows us to survive where others would hesitate. Adaptability? The crystalline Var ambassador's body refracted the hall lights into a dozen mocking colors. A polite word for chaos. Mira resisted the urge to roll her eyes. She had read their files. Each species proud of its own evolutionary triumphs. Each convinced it represented the galaxy's ideal of grace. Humanity's clumsy locomotion, their unshielded flesh, their need for breathable oxygen. All of it seemed laughable to beings that floated, shimmered, or spoke through thought. What none of them seemed to grasp was that fragility did not equal weakness. The council speaker, an amorphous being known only as the pre-march, raised a limb that glowed like 1,000 fireflies. Enough posturing, it said in a voice that resonated directly through bone. The rebellion on Relos. 9 threatens council stability. The insurgents' cloaking technology has rendered our automated strike systems ineffective. We require a peacekeeper with unconventional insight. At that, the assembly quieted. The rebellion's tactical brilliance had become infamous. No algorithm could predict its movements. Entire detachments had been wiped out without ever glimpsing their attackers. Mira took a small breath, the recycled air of the chamber oddly cold in her lungs. She knew her role was symbolic. Humans rarely fought in council campaigns. They were observers, aides, technicians. She'd volunteered because the alternative was to watch another distant war play out in silence. But as the discussion turned, she sensed something shifting in the room. An unspoken question hovering above the council. Could a human possibly be the solution where machines and precision had failed? Ambassador Giroux stepped forward. Earth Command proposes the assignment of a human tactical observer to the Relo's front, he announced. One trained in manual combat computation. A field sniper. A moment of stunned stillness, then a cacophony of disbelief. The Xylan delegates' tendrils flared in indignation. A ballistic weapon? You would bring ancient metallurgy to a plasma war. The Var ambassador's crystalline ridges glittered. Surely you jest. No organic I can track in such conditions. Giroux's voice remained measured. That is precisely the point. Where your systems fail, intuition may prevail. Humans calculate differently. Mira knew better than to interrupt, but the words pulsed in her mind. Calculate differently. That was the polite version of what her instructors had called it. Thinking with your gut. She'd spent years perfecting it, learning how to feel the arc of a bullet before firing, how to read wind from the sound of silence, how to turn imperfection into art. The Primarch's luminous body shifted, ripples of light coursing across its form. A human sniper. It repeated slowly, tasting the idea as though it were alien cuisine. Primitive, yet perhaps unpredictability is what we require. A murmur of protest followed, but none dared challenge the Primarch's authority outright. The being turned its many-eyed gaze upon Mira. "Sergeant Halley, you understand what is being requested?" "Yes, Speaker," she said, her voice steady. "Observation, analysis, and, if necessary, engagement. You comprehend the probability of failure?" "I do. And you accept?" Mira met its gaze without flinching. "I do." The Primarch inclined what might have been its head. "Then it is decided. Humanity will provide an observer to the Relos 9 campaign. Should she perish, her sacrifice will be noted." A flicker of sardonic humor crossed Mira's face. "Nice to know my death would be properly documented. That earned a ripple of amusement from a few of the less rigid species." The Xylan delegate, however, hissed sharply. "You mock a council decree?" She turned her head slightly toward it. "Not at all," she said. "I'd just like to know what I'm worth before I get shot at." The chamber fell silent. For the first time, several delegates regarded her not as a curiosity, but as something unpredictable, a variable that didn't fit their neat categories. When the session adjourned, Jeru walked beside her through the corridor of glass and light that led to the docking spire. His composure had returned, but his tone carried quiet unease. "You understand what you've agreed to?" "I do," she said. "Relos 9 is not a proving ground. It's a graveyard of failed technology. The Council expects a miracle." "Then it's good they sent a human," she replied. He studied her for a moment, then gave a small, resigned smile. "They'll never understand you." "Maybe they don't have to," she said. "They just need to see the result." They reached the viewport overlooking Orel's rings. The light fractured across her uniform, scattering in subtle gold patterns. For a heartbeat, the enormity of what awaited pressed against her chest, an entire galaxy watching, waiting for her to confirm their prejudice or shatter it. She felt the familiar tension in her shoulders, the readiness that came before every mission. Behind her, Jeru spoke softly. "You know they think you're clumsy, right? I've heard worse. And you'll prove them wrong?" She smiled faintly. "That's the plan." The transport lights flickered as the docking clamps released. Outside, the void shimmered with distant constellations. Mira's reflection merged with the stars, indistinguishable for a moment. Somewhere beyond them waited Relos 9, and whatever truths it held about humanity's place among the perfect. As the ship turned toward the jump gate, she exhaled slowly, steadying her heartbeat the way she always did before a shot. Slow, controlled, deliberate. Let them laugh now, she thought. The galaxy was about to learn that even clumsy hands could strike with perfect precision. The dropship shuddered as it cut through the upper atmosphere of Relos 9, its hull glowing faintly from friction. Inside, Sergeant Mira Halley sat strapped in, helmet resting between her boots, the rhythmic hum of the engines pulsing through the soles of her feet. The air smelled of metal and sterilized oil. She watched the desert moon grow larger through the viewport, a sphere of copper and stormlight. The planet was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, sharp, dangerous, functional. Across from her sat 3 alien officers from the Council's Joint Task Force. They avoided her gaze, communicating instead through flickers of color on their skin or faint tremors in the air. To them, she was an anomaly among precision instruments, a wild card inserted into their flawless systems. The Xylan commander, Kareth, finally addressed her through a translator drone that hovered between them. "Human, once we establish a perimeter, you will remain within the observation zone. You are not authorized to engage without directive confirmation." Mira smiled faintly. "Understood. Observation first." Karetha's glass-like body refracted the cabin lights. "See that you remember. Your projectile methods are quaint. We operate on predictive calculus, not instinct." She didn't bother replying. It wasn't worth explaining to a being who had never held a rifle that instinct could be calculus of its own. She'd been in enough campaigns to know arrogance when she saw it, and the council species had it in abundance. The irony was that arrogance made them predictable. When the dropship touched down, a cascade of dust rose around them, veiling the jagged horizon. The landing zone was a stretch of cracked basalt where the task force had established a temporary command base. Angular prefabricated shelters shimmered beneath energy shields, and drones hovered in silent patrols above. Mira stepped out into the wind, pulling her cloak tight as grains of reddish sand bit at her cheeks. The gravity was slightly weaker than Earth's, just enough to make every movement feel a fraction too long, too slow. A group of engineers, Spinlevar, worked nearby, aligning sensor pylons that pulsed with blue light. She noted the pattern, their dependence on precise coordinates and algorithmic models. The rebels' jammers, she'd read, disrupted these frequencies easily. It was one of many weaknesses the Council refused to acknowledge. She reported to the command tent, where holographic projections of the terrain floated above a table. Commander Kareth stood beside a collection of other species representatives, each broadcasting tactical data in their native systems. The map shimmered with interference, static bursts dancing along the ridge lines. "The rebels are cloaked here," Kareth said, indicating a cluster of red blurs. "Their jamming network renders our drones blind. Our assault teams have suffered 3 consecutive losses attempting to breach their perimeter." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Mira studied the map quietly. The jammer's range formed a pattern that reminded her of weather systems, dense storms with eye-like gaps. She leaned forward. "They're funneling you," she said. "Those interference zones, they're arranged to push your troops into a valley with no cover. Once you enter, you're exposed from 3 sides." Several delegates turned, clearly surprised she'd spoken unprompted. The VAR tactician emitted a disapproving hum. "Human intuition is not a valid analytic model." "Maybe not," Mira said, "but your data losses confirm it. 3 failed assaults in identical conditions suggest a trap you haven't accounted for." Kareth's eyes flared briefly, irritation flickering across his translucent frame. "And what would your primitive instincts suggest, Sergeant?" "Don't send more troops into their funnel," she said. "Pull back. Go silent, and make them think they've scared you off. Rebels get confident when they think you're blind. That's when they expose themselves." There was silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then, unexpectedly, the Primarch's remote avatar, an orb of white energy hovering at the table's center, pulsed once. "A simple strategy," it said, "but simplicity can be efficient. Proceed with the human suggestion." Kareth looked as though he'd swallowed glass. "As you command." The meeting dissolved soon after, and Mira stepped outside into the thinning light. 2 suns hovered on the horizon, painting the desert in copper and violet. Distant ridges shimmered in heat haze. She knelt, running gloved fingers through the sand. It was fine-grained and magnetic, the sort that clung to everything and distorted sensors. But to her eyes, it told a story: wind direction, density, possible sniper nests. The planet's very texture whispered tactics to those who knew how to listen. She unpacked her rifle, a matte black instrument of human craftsmanship. The aliens found it archaic, but it had saved her life more times than she could count. The scope hummed softly as she calibrated it manually. No AI, no automation, just the slow, deliberate alignment of mind and machine. Hours passed. As twilight deepened, she climbed a ridge overlooking the rebel perimeter. The command post behind her flickered with the sterile light of analysis, but out here, only the wind spoke. She watched through her scope, tracing heat signatures, tiny ripples of movement. The rebels were clever. They cloaked themselves in distortion fields, using the planet's electromagnetic flux to blur their outlines. To most sensors, they were invisible. To her, they were shadows with edges too still, too deliberate. Through the lens, she caught a flicker, something glinting briefly before disappearing. It was a signal mirror, or perhaps the reflection from a scope. Her pulse quickened. She marked the coordinates, whispering them into her calm, target activity, grid 12-7 alpha. No movement pattern consistent with local fauna. Karatha's voice crackled back, clipped and skeptical. Visual anomaly logged. Drones dispatched. She almost laughed. Drones won't see it. Nevertheless, within minutes, the sky filled with the hum of reconnaissance units. They swept the area and found nothing, just as she'd expected. When they returned empty, she adjusted her position and looked again. The glint appeared once more, slightly to the left this time. A sniper wouldn't stay in the same place. Whoever it was, they were skilled. She lowered her scope, exhaling slowly. The rebels weren't just jamming communications. They were observing, studying, testing. As night fell, Mira returned to camp. The alien officers were gathered around the tactical projection again, frustration thick in the air. Reports scrolled in unreadable symbols, all saying the same thing. Interference, loss of visual contact, failed scans. Kareth turned to her. Your assessment? They know we're watching, she said. They're baiting us. And your recommendation? She hesitated for a heartbeat. The old military instinct in her wanted to speak plainly, but she measured her tone for their ears. Pull back further. Let them think we've withdrawn completely. I'll stay forward, hidden. If they break cover to confirm, I'll see them first. The Xylan commander stared at her, as if weighing the risk. A single organic agent beyond the perimeter is tactically unsound. It's also the only thing they won't expect, she replied. The Primarch's avatar pulsed again. Approved. Later, in the isolation of her tent, Mira lay awake, listening to the faint hum of alien machinery and the distant moan of wind over stone. She thought about the council chamber, the way they'd laughed. Clumsy, they called humans. Fragile. She smiled faintly in the dark. Fragile things learned precision the hard way. She checked her rifle again, the metallic click comforting in the silence. Beyond the thin walls of the tent stretched kilometers of hostile terrain. Somewhere out there, unseen, someone was watching her too. That was fine. She wanted them to. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. The desert woke before dawn, the wind rising like a slow exhale from the bones of the planet. Mira lay motionless on the ridge, her body pressed flat against the cooling stone. The horizon glowed faintly, a seam of copper between night and day. She had been there for hours, unmoving except for the steady rhythm of her breathing. Every minute detail of the landscape was imprinted on her mind. The jagged arc of the eastern dunes, the shimmer of heat that masked distance, the way the wind bent the spindly iron grass. She had studied the terrain until it felt like part of her own anatomy. Through her scope, the world was stripped of beauty, reduced to angles, shadows, and probabilities. She tracked the patterns of rebel patrols, the flicker of distortion fields that hid their movements. They were patient, cautious, too disciplined for the undisciplined rabble the council had described. She admired that. A worthy opponent was always easier to understand. The calm in her ear buzzed faintly. Halley, report, came Karatha's voice, brittle with impatience. Nothing significant, she whispered. No shift in formation. They're waiting for us to blink first. Your reading of their behavior suggests intent. They're testing the perimeter, she said. They know we're watching. They just don't know how. Karath exhaled, a sound like cracking glass. The pre-march demands progress. Our forces cannot linger indefinitely. Then stop lingering, she said. Let me work. Silence followed, but no further objections came. That was as close to permission as she needed. She adjusted the rifle's stabilizer and recalibrated the scope manually. The air density fluctuated more than she liked. Relo's 9's twin suns created constant thermals that warped trajectories. Most council weapons compensated automatically, which was why they failed when jamming fields distorted the sensors. Her rifle, though, had no such dependency. It obeyed only her. The first sign of movement came with the wind, a ripple, faint and almost invisible, spreading across the valley floor. Something large cloaked itself in mirage light, crawling forward. Mira's eyes narrowed. The rebels were shifting position, but not to attack. They were repositioning a command relay. That meant leadership was nearby. She'd check her watch. The council base would be fully powered by now, their scanners whirring uselessly against the interference. She was alone as planned. That thought didn't unsettle her. Solitude was where she worked best. She had learned early in her career that silence could be an ally if you listen hard enough. She adjusted her position, inching along the ridge until she found a patch of shade cast by a protruding rock. The temperature had already begun to climb. She drank sparingly from her hydration line and refocused on the target zone. A faint shimmer moved between two outcroppings, a cloaked figure, tall and deliberate. Unlike the others, this one moved with the unhurried confidence of command. Her pulse slowed. She measured wind velocity, distance, gravity drift. The math unfolded naturally in her mind. She could almost feel the bullet's path before pulling the trigger. But she waited. Patience was the sniper's most brutal weapon. Minutes stretched, the valley holding its breath. The figure stopped near a communications array, lifted a small device, and gestured to others hidden nearby. Through the distortion, Mira glimpsed the faint outline of command insignia etched onto armor. The rebel commander. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger guard. Every lesson she had ever learned condensed into this moment. Stillness, breath control, intent. Her scope crosshairs drifted over the target's torso, then settled just below the helmet's visor. Distance, 4.2 kilometers. Wind speed, shifting northeast, minor crosscurrent. Air temperature, rising. She adjusted by instinct. Then the wind changed again. A brief gust howled across the ridge, scattering dust and static. The shimmer of the commander's cloak wavered, and for a single second, the camouflage failed. She fired. The rifle kicked gently, a whisper of recoil against her shoulder. The supersonic round cut through air and distance, curving along the invisible math she'd constructed in her mind. The sound reached her almost a full second after the shot, a soft thud swallowed by wind. Through her scope, the commander jerked backward and fell, his body half visible as the cloak sputtered out. The soldiers nearby froze, confusion rippling through their formation. Then chaos erupted. Mira exhaled once, a release of pressure she hadn't realized she was holding. She watched the panic unfold, the rebels scattering, their cloaks failing under the sudden surge of comm interference caused by their own disrupted network. One perfect shot had shattered their coordination. She toggled her comm. Command, this is Halley. Target neutralized. Recommend immediate advance while they're disorganized. For several seconds, nothing but static answered. Then Caratha's voice came, strained and disbelieving. Repeat your statement, Sergeant. Commander down, she said. Coordinates transmitting now. More static, then a burst of overlapping alien speech as the council officers argued in the background. Finally, Carath returned. Impossible. No system confirms visual contact. Our sensors show no evidence of. Look again, she interrupted. Use the atmospheric distortion pattern from my data feed. A pause, then an audible gasp from someone in the command tent miles away. Confirmed, Carath said quietly. By the void, you struck him through full, cloaking interference. I aimed where the heat should have been, she said. Guess right enough times, you get lucky. Luck, Carath murmured, but there was no contempt in his tone this time. Only awe. The council forces advanced within the hour, guided by Mira's data. Without their commander, the rebels' coordination collapsed. Cloaking fields flickered and died as the power network destabilized. Mira observed the entire collapse from her vantage point, marking targets, relaying coordinates. Each call she made resulted in a precision strike from orbital support. When the dust settled, the valley was silent except for the hiss of cooling metal and the soft crackle of failing electronics. The council troops moved through the wreckage, confirming what the satellites already knew. The rebellion's leadership had been decimated. Mira descended from the ridge slowly, her rifle slung across her back. As she approached the valley floor, the remaining alien officers met her halfway, their armor gleaming in the fading light. Carath stood at the forefront, his translucent frame dulled by dust. He regarded her for a long moment before speaking. You defied directive orders, he said, voice sharp but lacking venom. I followed the mission's intent, she replied. You acted without coordination, without predictive authorization. And yet, he hesitated, light refracting oddly through his body. The battle is over. The enemy is defeated. No algorithm predicted this outcome. That's because algorithms can improvise, she said simply. Caritha's head tilted, a gesture that might have meant respect. The council will need to reassess. She nodded, too tired for pride. Tell them not to take too long. Wars don't wait for committees. As the recovery teams began their work, Mira climbed back toward her ridge, drawn to the solitude that had defined her role. From the summit, she looked out over the valley where the rebels had stood. Smoke drifted upward in slow ribbons, fading into the amber sky. The twin suns hung low now, their light fractured by dust, casting everything in hues of gold and blood. She sat down and disassembled her rifle piece by piece, cleaning it with the ritual care of a soldier who understood that victory never belonged to one moment alone. It was earned through every decision, every breath held and released. The calm crackled again. Caritha's voice came softer this time. The council requests your immediate return to orbit for debriefing. The Premarch wishes to address you personally. Copy that, she said. As she stood, the wind carried the faint scent of scorched ozone and iron. She looked once more at the ridge where she had taken the shot, and for a fleeting second, she saw it from above. The geometry of the battlefield, the improbable trajectory of the bullet, the delicate harmony of physics and instinct that had rewritten the council's expectations. Then she turned away, climbing toward the extraction point, leaving behind the silence she'd mastered. The desert had given her what she needed, proof. The orbital citadel above Orrel glittered like a crown of glass suspended in the void. The council chamber within was quieter than usual, its walls pulsing faintly with the bioluminescent rhythm of 1,000 interlinked minds. News from Relos. 9 had already spread, first in disbelief, then in fascination, and finally in reverent silence. Entire fleets had fallen before that rebellion's cloaking technology, yet a single human with a ballistic rifle had undone it in one shot. The event had fractured the council's certainty, forcing species that measured intelligence in terabytes to confront the unquantifiable. Mira Halley stood once more at the center of the chamber, feeling the weight of that silence press down on her. The transparent floor beneath her feet showed the gas giant's swirling storms far below, vast and impersonal. The last time she had stood here, laughter had echoed through this room. Now there was none, only the low, harmonic hum of thought. The Primarch's form shimmered into coherence before her, its shifting light subdued. Sergeant Halley of Earth, it said, voice resonant and calm. You have returned from Relos. 9 with a result that defies predictive frameworks. The rebellion is extinguished, and yet no pattern explains your success. Mira clasped her hands behind her back. With respect, Speaker, it wasn't about patterns. It was about observation and timing. A ripple of color swept through the assembly, curiosity tinged with disbelief. The crystalline VAR ambassador spoke first, its voice a cascade of tones. You imply that instinct supersedes data. I'm saying data needs context, she replied. You can't measure a shadow without understanding the light behind it. The metaphor hung in the air, puzzling to some, profound to others. The Xylan delegate, Kareth, stood among the observers, his translucent frame dulled from the dust of Relos 9. He inclined his head slightly toward her, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or apology. The Primarch's body pulsed once, the light dimming and flaring like a heartbeat. The Council recognizes the anomaly. A single organic agent, operating without network integration, achieved a result beyond statistical probability. We must understand why. Mira exhaled slowly. Maybe because humans don't need perfection to succeed. We work with what we have, flaws included. Sometimes the mistake is what makes the shot hit. The chamber stirred again, though this time the murmurs carried intrigue rather than derision. To beings evolved for precision, The notion of deliberate imperfection was alien. Yet the data could not be denied. Kareth spoke, his voice softer than before. The Council's predictive systems collapsed under interference. The human did not. This suggests adaptability of a kind beyond logic. Mira gave a small shrug. You rely on algorithms to predict variables. Humans are the variables. We adapt faster than you can measure. The Primarch's light dimmed further, contemplative. Your statement implies potential. Potential demands evaluation. Humanity's classification as auxiliary species is therefore under review. Ambassador Giroux, standing at the edge of the circle, allowed himself a restrained smile. A historic consideration, speaker. The Primarch turned toward him. Indeed, but history is not written by anomaly alone. The question remains, was this human's result replicable or singular? Mira felt every gaze shift back to her. Maybe both, she said. Replicable, because every human learns by failure. Singular, because no one fails the same way twice. That drew a faint sound, something between amusement and confusion, from several delegates. The Primarch's lights flickered, perhaps in acknowledgement. An imperfect creature, succeeding through imperfection. Curious. She could feel the tension in the room soften, just slightly. The laughter that had once mocked her species was gone, replaced by something sharper, more cautious, respect. The debrief continued for hours. They asked her to describe the physics of the shot, the sensory calculations, the emotional state before firing. She answered simply, refusing to let them turn it into mysticism. It wasn't magic, only focus and discipline. Two things no algorithm could simulate because they required purpose. When the last of the questions ended, the Primarch said, "Your testimony will be archived in the Council's strategic compendium. You may request compensation." "I don't need payment," she said. "Just acknowledgement that humanity can contribute." "That has been noted." The Primarch's light flared, signaling conclusion. "You may depart." Mira turned to leave, but paused when Kareth approached. Up close, his crystalline surface reflected fragments of her face, distorted yet clear enough to meet her eyes. "When I first met you," he said, "I believed humans clumsy, reckless, unrefined." "You weren't wrong," she said with a half-smile. "We just make clumsiness useful." He tilted his head, studying her. "Your methods disturb my logic, yet your results command my respect. Perhaps there is value in chaos." "Chaos builds character," she replied. "You should try it sometime." He almost smiled, or at least the alien equivalent of it, and stepped aside to let her pass. Outside the chamber, the corridor stretched in a long curve of translucent metal and shifting light. Through the panoramic window, the gas giant storms swirled in silent fury, beautiful and remote. Mira paused there, letting the sight fill her vision. The galaxy felt vast again, humbling in its indifference. If for the first time, she sensed that humanity's presence within it had shifted, however slightly. Ambassador Giroux caught up to her. "They'll study this for decades," he said quietly. "You've changed the way they see us." "They'll go back to their patterns soon enough," she said. "But they'll remember the shot." He nodded. "You could have asked for anything, rank, resources, even a seat in the Council." "I didn't come here for that," she said. "I came to prove we belong." They walked together toward the docking platform. Around them, alien technicians paused in their work to glance her way, some curious, others respectful. Her name had already traveled farther than she could imagine, whispered in places where humans had only ever been footnotes. At the airlock, Giroux extended his hand. "You've done more for Earth than you know." She clasped it briefly. "Then make sure it counts." He nodded, and she stepped through the portal into the transport bay. The ship waiting there was small, its hull still bearing the scars of atmospheric entry. She ran a hand along the metal, grounding herself in its familiar solidity. As the engines powered up, she took one last look at the Citadel through the viewport. Its shining spires reflected the gas giant's light, the same way glass reflects flame, brilliant, fragile, and temporary. During ascent, she removed her gloves and stared at her hands. The skin was rough, marked by the memory of the rifle's grip. To most species, these hands looked inelegant, even crude. But they were hers, human hands, clumsy enough to build, destroy, and create meaning all at once. The comm crackled softly. Caritha's voice came through, quieter now. "Sergeant Halley, before you depart, what will you do next?" "Go home," she said. "Maybe teach someone how to miss better." He didn't understand, but he didn't need to. The channel clicked off. The ship angled toward the jump gate, and Orel shrank beneath her. Stars unfolded ahead, scattered like embers across the dark. She felt the hum of the engines vibrate through her bones, the rhythm steady and alive. Somewhere beyond those stars waited other conflicts, other judgments, and perhaps more laughter. That was fine. She'd faced them the same way she had faced every impossible shot, with patience, precision, and a touch of imperfection. As the jump drive engaged, the viewport filled with light. Mira leaned back, eyes half closed, a small smile curving her lips. The galaxy might never call humans graceful, but after Relo's 9, it would never again call them helpless.